Hi, this is Ed with the Village Well. Today I'm going to be discussing the 4 trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and how those responses impact our parenting. You already know what happens when you get triggered, when your kid's behavior prompts an overreaction in your reaction to that behavior. Your sympathetic nervous system, your amygdala, your lizard brain takes over, and you start to feel some sort of way. Particularly, you go into a reaction that is prepared to support your survival. So you often feel your body getting hotter, hands may start to shake, my ears get hot, and it becomes difficult to access your rational brain. You often feel like you're in a struggle and you can't get out of that struggle. Well, you might not know that our responses to triggers happen in 4 different categories of response. And so today we're going to take a look at those. You've probably heard of flight and fight. You may not have heard of freeze and fawn. And so stick with us for the whole thing and see where you identify, right? I think it's also helpful to imagine how these scenarios play out in nature. So let's imagine that you're a bunny rabbit and you're being pursued by a coyote. This is a life or death situation. And you, bunny rabbit, and you, mom, dad, grandma, uncle, have responses that are designed to protect you in this situation, right? To prevent you from life or death. And so the first response of the rabbit to the coyote is going to be to what? Yeah, to run away, of course, right? And so that is our flight response that many of us experience in other aspects of our life, including our parenting. Right? And so an example of a flight response is when our kid does something that annoys us, that triggers us, is we have an overwhelming desire to get out of the situation. Now, in modern life, those flight responses come up in different ways. It may look like workaholism. It may look like overthinking a situation. It may look like anxiety, panic, difficulty making decisions. It may look like wanting to just sit still through a difficult situation and ignore it till it gets better. It may look like perfectionism, trying to do everything right so that that trigger never happens. All right? Flight response is very common in all folks, but it's particularly more common in moms who have been socialized, right? Who have been socialized that an aggressive tendency is not permittable, and therefore fleeing from the situation is a more socialized, normal, and acceptable response, right? Again, this doesn't like men flee, women fight. But there are patterns here that we recognize. All right. The second possibility is the fight response that I mentioned. The fight response looks like controlling, bullying, narcissism, anger outbursts, and explosive behavior, right? You know a fight response when you see it, when you experience it. The fight response is my default response when my children are triggering me. I want to go into battle. I want to overpower. I want to threaten. I want to squash that situation. The next response is the freeze response. So let's imagine that rabbit can't run away from the coyote. The coyote is gaining ground on the rabbit. The rabbit knows it can't fight the coyote. It's not going to win that battle. And so its next power move, if you will, might be to freeze and hide so the coyote won't see the rabbit and eat the rabbit. Freeze in our modern world looks like difficulty making decisions, feeling stuck, disassociation, which is the concept that your brain kind of checks out, your mind kind of checks out of your body, and often you can see things happening from a separate perspectives. It looks like isolating, and it looks like numbing. So I was not very familiar with the freeze response because through most of my life, I've either been a fighter or a fleer. And then during the pandemic, I was really struck by how often I just felt stuck. I had trouble making decisions. I had trouble figuring out what to do. There were so many times. Remember when we were overwhelmed with terror and confusion in the beginning, and I just felt so overwhelmed that it was hard to move and act. I was really caught up in a freeze response. And then the fourth trauma response is what we call fawn. Imagine that same rabbit. It's cornered. It can't run. It can't fight. The coyote sees it. The next possibility is fawn, which means the rabbit is going to do everything it can to make the coyote love the rabbit so he won't eat the rabbit. All right? Now, fawn response does occur in animals in nature, but given the complexity of that response, it's more likely to occur in humans. A common fawn response that I see is in a dysfunctional family where there is abuse, physical or emotional abuse. The child may try to do everything to keep the parents happy, to keep the abuser from getting triggered so that harm will not come to that child or to their other family members, siblings, etc., right? All of us engage in each of these responses at different times in different ways. So all of us have experienced each of these four categories in some way. And what I find is parents tend to have default responses in specific contexts. For example, as I mentioned, I'm a fighter. When my kids do something that is triggering, I have to work really hard not to engage in a power struggle with them, right? My husband, on the other hand, has flight as his default response. And so he tends to check out of a situation, which will make me upset because I feel like he's just ignoring the situation when it comes up, leaving it on me to deal with it. And so we've had discussions about how we can both engage in a way that is untriggered and that is positive and productive for the situation at hand. Okay, so those are the responses. So what? Well, understanding the default trauma response that you have in a particular situation, especially with your kids, can help you recognize when you go into that situation and understand what you need from yourself or from others to help pull you out of that situation. So let's run through those four topics again and talk about what folks might need. Right? So if you are triggered by your child and you feel yourself wanting to completely detach from the situation, wanting to run, wanting to hide, all right, if you can, it's important for you not to face the situation right away. Take a timeout. Take that space. Go for a walk. Call your friend. Ground yourself. Figure out logically what you want to do in that situation, which can only happen when you are regulated, right? Develop that plan and then come back and re-engage, right? It's very hard for someone in flight to engage in a situation when you aren't prepared for that. Fight, we also need to take a break at that time. However, it's very hard for us to do so because taking a break, stopping, resting, not doing something feels like losing. It feels like we're in a power struggle and we can't lose the power struggle. Now, that is a cue for us right there that we're triggered, right? Because if we're in a win and loss situation with our kids, it's not a healthy dynamic. And so we want to pull away, calm down. It may help to have a partner or someone else say, hey, I see that you're bothered. It's time to withdraw from the situation, right? And figure out some communication so that you can trust and follow through on that. But get that perspective and come back in a calm, regulated, reasonable way to deal with the situation. If you are in freeze, it's going to take extra support. This is an extra triggered dynamic. It's going to take extra support for you to deal with the situation at hand. And so if you think freeze is one of your primary identities with your kids, I highly recommend that you get some additional support to work through that. I mean therapy, I mean EMDR, I mean working with a parent coach, whatever the thing is, because it means that you are so highly volatile in that moment that it's hard for you to move at all, to act at all. And so some more intensive support may be necessary. Finally, if you catch yourself in fawn behavior, the work that you need to do is to understand that it is impossible to keep your kids or your partner, or whoever, happy all the time. Now, I'm not talking about caretaking behavior. We want you to take care of your kids. And I'm not talking about behavior that is desiring to make people happy, right? Folks who have fawn instincts also bring the best food to the potluck, right? Know everybody's birthday. We want to keep those aspects of your kindness and generosity, but also understand that if you feel like every situation that goes wrong, you have to make it right, that's a trauma response and it's also impossible. And so understanding and practicing that when your kids don't like their dinner, that they can eat what is at hand, or they can choose not to eat and nothing else will be served that night. If you create an experience for your kids, a day at the library, right? Or an hour at the library, and they don't have a good time, that's not your fault, and put the onus on them to figure out how to find joy in their situation. It's a lot of work for all of us with our various triggered response. But it's work that is worthwhile to both understand ourselves, to support our kids, and to heal from the wounds that we have from our past. So put in comments, what is your default response and how does that show up and what are you going to do about it? I hope this was helpful. I'm wishing you calm, joy, connection, and meaning on your parenting journey.